A segunda entrevista deste Milênio Especial é com o historiador e ex-integrante da CIA, a Central de Inteligência dos Estados Unidos, Chalmers Johnson. Ele é o autor de uma trilogia em que criticava os custos para a manutenção da hegemonia norte-americana e previu que algo como o 11 de setembro aconteceria em reação à imposição da presença americana no mundo. Chalmers Johnson ficou célebre depois dos atentados de 11 de setembro de 2001, que ele, de certa forma, previu no primeiro livro da trilogia, Blowback, publicado no Brasil com o título em inglês. Blowback, ou retaliação, é um termo usado na CIA, a agência de espionagem americana, para descrever situações em que ações americanas provocam represálias. Johnson, que trabalhou para a CIA e se aposentou como professor de História das universidades de Berkeley e San Diego, recebeu o Milênio em sua casa no sul da Califórnia.
First, let's talk about Blowback, the first book in your trilogy. What does it mean, the concept for you?
Reaction to American foreign policy. It is simply that is, a better translation might be retaliation. But it does mean, above all, reaction. That is the response to it. The Americans don't usually anticipate it, almost never anticipate it accurately. They have a tendency to think that they are doing good in the world and that other people agree with them, and that therefore they're surprised by some of the reactions they get. But that's basically what it means. It was I was writing it in the late 1990s, before the turn of the century, and it seemed to me then that the main foreign policy problems for the United States in the coming decades were going to be things left over from the last half of the 20th century, and that they were piling up, that it was not going to be good news.
And then after the book came out, September 11 happened.
That's right. People keep saying, oh my God, he predicted it. Well, I didn't obviously predict it, except in one sense, that I said there will be a backlash, if you will. It would be a different term, from the third world, from the nations that we have intimidated. I'm just, thanks to President Chavez of Venezuela, I'm just in the process of finishing up, I'm almost finished, with Eduardo Galeano's The Open Veins of Latin America. My God, what a fantastically important work it really is. It's the only thing I just think it's astonishing, and how few Americans know anything about it.
I can't say that you predicted, but reading your book, one can see what would be the American reaction to 9/11.
Ah, yes. Well, the Americans still remain a little shocked. Shocked by the thought that they are not universally loved, that their armed forces are really armed forces rather than armed missionaries or something of this sort. And so that I think they overreacted badly.
The reaction of an empire.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was simply saying, of course it's an empire, and even though the Americans refuse to acknowledge it, and it's not an empire in the usual sense used by the Europeans to mean colonies. That it is, in some ways, I would say, an empire much more like that of the former Soviet Union. It's an empire of military bases, of which we have over 800 in countries other than our own around the world. It's unimaginably expensive. It has almost nothing to do with American security. It is a way of maintaining hegemony, that is, control, dominance over the rest of the world. And though we refuse to admit it, we like it.
But one thing that you show is the decline of that empire, the overstretching of that empire.
All empires do. And this one certainly is. And and you wouldn't know it or wouldn't understand it or foresee it because you've never been candid about what it was in the first place. The fact that we're not liked. Americans can't imagine what it's like having several thousand youthful, oversexed, often racially biased, certainly culturally biased, young Americans, heavily armed, living cheek by jowl with them. It's extremely unpleasant. We don't understand that. We don't know anything about it. We have very little empathy for it. And it is, well, it's in fact one of my main criticisms of President Obama. I like what he's done. I voted for him. I was a supporter of his. But I think he's been wildly out of his depth and refusing to pay attention to the effects of our military bases around the world, which also are contributing to our tremendous economic difficulties. We can't afford this expense any longer.
So in your books you also predict that there's going to be, and there has been, a blowback in the economy. So
yes.
the bankruptcy of America because of its, as a consequence of its overstretched imperial reach.
And it's erroneous belief that we are, that our wealth is unlimited, that we can go and do anything we want to. The almost crazy notion that you can dominate the world in a purely military sense. We are no longer, by any stretch of the imagination, the world's economic hegemon. We've lost that position rather decisively. When Britain was in that position after the First World War, we saw the decline of the British Empire quite markedly. And finally leading up to the end of World War II, when they decided, if we're going to remain a democracy, we've got to get rid of the empire. We can't continue to rule countries like India using essentially Nazi methods, having just defeated the Nazis in World War II. This is in some ways what was in my mind to say, as we came along in the late 1990s, end of Cold War, disappearance of the Soviet Union, things of this sort, why aren't we in this country talking about liquidating this huge apparatus around the world that we've developed vested interest in it, but that we're not rationally deciding what it's for, nor are we even beginning to look at, say, its effects in countries like Latin America, where our record, as Galeano marvelously describes, is simply abominable.
Do you still see a risk that America, to keep its empire, would sacrifice democracy?
It's conceivable. That is, that's one of the main analytical arguments that I'm trying to put forward in all three of these books, is that historically, going back to the Roman Empire, we have ample evidence that a nation can be an empire or it can be a democracy, but it can't be both.
So what would be the most dangerous situation? Pakistan?
Well, probably Pakistan is one, in the sense that it's a weak country, being meddled with by naive people. We just simply refuse to be candid on the subject of you can't really win friends through bayonets, that the military isn't going to do it, that it strikes me as one of the weirdest propositions in international politics is to think that you can cause the Pakistani people to put their trust in the United States, since it's allied with the two most anti-Muslim countries on earth, India and Israel. Under these circumstances, that's implausible, and you should not anticipate it. And so that it is a very dangerous situation, but I think it would be, the thing is, it's not going to erupt. It's going to be unstable. The question is, does the instability affect us in any way? Not too seriously. And India will be extremely alert over this one. China will be too, for a long, long time. And we should quit believing that every situation of this sort on earth requires our normally incompetent attention.
But you believe that America as a democracy can still choose to divest itself of empire?
Yes, I think it still could.
But how?
Well, I can't think of anything other than mobilization from below. That is, an educated public, aware of what they're about to lose, that once they do lose it, they'll never get it back.
That is democracy.
Democracy. That is the Roman Republic was a genuine democracy. It is the American Constitution just reeks of Roman precedences, vetoes, and other such Latinate words everywhere in it. We also know that the founders of the United States and the authors of the Constitution were enthusiasts for the Roman Republic. Well, once it was gone, it didn't come back for 1,000 years, and we should bear that in mind. It's about the only country that I can think of that voluntarily gave up their empire was Nikita Gorbachev, realizing that it was no longer worth it, that he would rather have friendly relations with France and Germany than with those crummy republics that Stalin had created in East Europe. And he tried it. He ran into huge vested interests that have not worked out perfectly by any manner of means. But the threat from Russia is certainly diminished. Russia is today a much smaller place than it was when it was the Soviet Union. And the trends have been in the right direction. We should be encouraging it rather than standing in their way.